So it's been so awesome this morning to sit down and have a chat with Associate Editor at The Australian, Jamie Walker. And we've been talking about IVF laws here in Australia and what I'd like to see change. But now I'm going to turn the tables on him and ask him a few questions. So thank you so much for being here, Jamie.
Well, you're welcome, but I don't know how I feel about this.
It's been very exciting for me to meet you. You've got a really good job at The Australian, and I think a really important job. Journalism does come with a lot of responsibilities, and in fact, that's what I wanted to ask you. Like, what do you think are the responsibilities of a journalist?
I think your primary responsibility is to be honest and fair. And fair actually can mean different things, I think, and people often don't really recognise this. I mean, you can actually be unfair to someone by telling the whole story. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does.
And I think that, you know, sometimes you can, you know, fairly put all the details in the story, but you'll humiliate that person. Or you'll give actually an unfair impression of what that person stands for and who they are. So I think that's really important. But I think and again, people will have different views on this, but my responsibility, I think, is to my readers, the readers of The Australian. And that is my foremost responsibility, to be fair, to be accurate, to tell a story, but to do it with them in mind, because at the end of the day, you know, that's who's paying the dollars to either buy the print edition of the paper, which, you know, is probably not going to be here forever, or certainly to subscribe online.
Yeah, I agree with you. I really do. That's very well said. What do you think makes The Australian unique as a newspaper or avenue of news for us?
Look, we are actually, believe it or not, fairly unique in the world by the way the paper's structured. So we actually have our head office is in Sydney, but probably about half our staff are outside of headquarters in Holt Street. And, you know, that's actually very rare. So we have big bureaus in every capital city. Some are not so big these days, but I'm attached to the Brisbane Bureau, and we've got the best part of 20 people in that bureau.
Oh, right.
And, you know, that gives a very, very unique sort of take on the Australian. So if you look at, say, the New York Times or the LA Times, yes, they have, you know, big bureaus domestically in the US, and they have more bureaus than we do overseas. But we've managed to retain 4, which in this day and age isn't bad. But you'd find that most of their staff is in headquarters, and ours is actually distributed right around the country. So we have bureaus in Perth, Adelaide, Darwin, Hobart. Of course, you know, we have a big operation in Melbourne, and we have head office in Sydney, and we have the bureau in Brisbane. And I think that you know, gives a regional flavour to the coverage, which is actually very important. And one thing I always kind of am deeply proud of with The Australian is, say, if you go back to say the 80s or the 70s, the bad old days in Queensland, if you know, there was this sense that you'd have, you know, the national media talking down to Queensland, and that's something we've never done because we've had people and a strong presence here.
That's a really good point too, I think. You are really right. And I was really impressed just today. You've driven all the way down from Brisbane to the Gold Coast to have a face-to-face chat with me rather than just doing it on the phone. So I was impressed with that. I thought you do get a better take when you're face-to-face, I think.
And I guess the other thing we do, you know, we're still old-fashioned enough to put time and resources, and we're lucky enough to have resources, and not every publication can say that these days, but we'll put time into stories, and that's incredibly important for a journalist. You'd know from your own journalism.
That makes all the difference. Yeah, that is true. Well, so what do you think makes a good story then?
I think, again, one of the big traps journalists make is they don't think enough about the people consuming the story. They think about their peers, they think about, you know, what sort of run they're going to get. But I say to the younger to the younger reporters on the paper when I'm, kind of helping them out with stuff.
Yeah.
Put yourself in the place of a reader. So if you're reading your own story and it's kind of, not quite working with you, well, how do you think the person on the other end is going to feel about it? And I one of my pet hates is jargon, which a lot of journalists fall into when they actually don't know what they're talking about. And again, I think part of our responsibility is for us to get our heads around what we're reporting on. So what makes a good story? Something that'll engage the reader or the consumer, be that on TV or radio. Something that's going to engage the reader, be fair, be accurate, and above all, don't misrepresent what you're writing about.
Yeah, sure. Yeah. No, that's very well said as well. Well, then, speaking of writing, what is your writing routine?
Fairly haphazard. But something I've learnt over the years is if I've got a big story to do, such as the one I'll be doing on you, that'll be 3,000 or 4,000 words.
Yeah, it's a big topic.
It's a big topic and it's a complicated one.
Yeah.
What I find is really useful is have set a period of time where I'm going to actually sit down and write the thing.
Yeah.
And get up very early in the morning after it's kind of been, percolating around in my head all night.
Yeah.
And it does, get up in the morning really early, 5 o'clock or so, 4 o'clock sometimes, and just write.
Okay.
And try and get, 2,000-3,000 words down in that first stretch.
Okay.
And I find that incredibly useful. But I'm always intrigued by writing styles. One of my favourite stories is about the English writer Graham Greene.
Oh yeah.
And he used to have a set routine where he would write 321 words a day. And not a word more.
Okay, that's...
Not a word less. He'd get 321 words.
Okay.
And if it was at midnight, that was fine.
Yeah.
If it was at 6 o'clock in the morning,
Good
that
eye.
was even better. Usually be about lunchtime and off he'd go to the pub.
Okay. Oh, well, at least he got his 321 words.
He did.
That's funny. Well, whatever works, I guess. Writing is one of those things.
Yeah, well,
It obviously works for you. Your stories are really, really well written.
Well, I think you're very kind, but
No,
thank you.
they are.
But you better hope this one is.
No, I'm sure it will be. But yes, it is a big topic. I agree. And you would have to do your research, wouldn't you? Because every topic's difficult. Like, history, science, so much that you have to sort of know then.
Yeah, sometimes there's a lot to get your head around.
Yeah.
But that's one of the great privileges of the job.
Yeah.
And I often think it's a bit like writing university assignments all the time.
Yeah, I guess so. That's true. That is true. Well, what would you like? I've been talking to you a little bit about IVF laws in Australia, and there are a few things I'd love to see changed. What would you like to see changed in society in your lifetime?
I think like a lot of people, I'm really, not very happy about the way the public discourse has gone in Australia.
Yeah.
Now, I don't for a moment think that we as journalists don't have some blame for this, but gee, I find the culture of people jumping to conclusions really, really disturbing.
Yeah.
I think look, I'm actually quite old-fashioned about some things. So I was particularly I guess horrified in a way about how the whole Brittany Higgins coverage unspooled. And I don't want to be critical of anyone, especially not Miss Higgins, because whatever happened in that office, it was something clearly very traumatic happened to that young woman.
Yeah.
But in terms of how that whole media trial played out, like a lot of journalists, I do feel a little bit concerned about that.
Yeah, I know what you mean.
Yeah, I feel, I just feel, and these days how split we are.
Yeah.
People jumping to conclusions all the time.
Yeah.
And I had an interesting conversation with Jim Chalmers, the treasurer, a while ago.
Cool.
And Jim, I find, is a really interesting politician. Let's see how he goes.
Yep.
But one of the things that I talked to him about a bit was he wrote his doctoral thesis was on Paul Keating.
Oh yeah. Yep.
And Jim is a PhD, as in Dr. Chalmers,
Yeah.
but it's not a PhD in economics, it's a PhD in politics.
Oh right.
And I just wondered, I wondered aloud to him, this is when he was talking about, we have to have a big open conversation. I said to him, do you really think that you as Treasurer could have the kind of conversation that Paul Keating set up in, I think it was 1986, when he warned about Australia becoming a banana republic?
Yeah.
Do you think you could do that today? And he was kind of, that's our aim. And I said, but the last treasurer who tried to have a full and open conversation about the state of the books, the state of the national affairs, was Joe Hockey in 2014, when he said the country was living beyond its means.
Yeah, that's right.
And look what happened to him.
Yeah.
So I do wonder a little bit about, can our politicians and our leaders actually have the sort of discussions that we as a country need to have? And will we, more to the point, allow them to have that with the kind of short-termism you see in a lot of the coverage? And as I said to you, I'm not for a moment going to pretend that I don't have some skin in this game. I do, and I think all journalists have a bit of responsibility to think about those issues.
Yeah, that is true. That is really true. There are definitely things that we do need to shift, and
but
right.
I don't have answers. That's the other thing. I really don't. But you look at how politics is practiced in the United States, and again, people don't realise how unique we are. Federal election campaign, the Prime Minister, the Leader of the Opposition, they do walk around. They do talk to people.
Yes, they do.
They do engage.
Yeah.
There's no way a US president or presidential candidate could do that.
Yeah.
There's no way a British Prime Minister could do that.
That's true.
And yet in this country, we do have that ability.
Yeah.
I think that's a very special thing.
It is a special thing, and journalists keep the conversation going too, and part of your job, I think, is to keep the conversation open too, so that we are talking about things maybe not as much as we should, but hopefully, if the conversation's open enough, we might get there. Thank you so much for your time today, and thank you for travelling down here, and thank you for covering our topic as well, and really appreciate your interest, and it was just wonderful to meet you, and keep up your awesome work.
And you too, Suvi, and good luck for 2 weeks' time, and I'll look forward to seeing you on the happy day after.
I can't wait to introduce you to Spencer.
I'll look forward to it.